We are in the eighth sermon in the Gospel of Mark. I think this is going to be the last one this year, and I hope to return to it next year because I really, really love preaching through books of the Bible. I'm holding it loosely because I also want to go through the book of Acts. It's weird to go through the book of Acts until you finish one of the Gospels, I think, but I want to go through one of Paul's letters again. We went through one earlier. And I just think it's great to go to just preach through entire books of scripture because it gives you the opportunity to meditate on those scriptures and to think about them throughout the week. And we want to get those scriptures inside of us. We want to internalize the story of God because when you internalize the story of God, it becomes your story because it's how you will interpret the world around you, and the way you're thinking about the world is the way that you are going to act. That's the way those are the decisions that you are going to make. And what I like about the Gospel of Mark is I like the ending right now. Like I don't know. I hope we don't find a different ending to it because the one that we had in our most common scriptures is actually not in the earliest manuscripts. It looks like a scribe added them on the end. You always hear about things of the Bible being edited thousands of times. Well, we have the ability to find out if that happened and where it happened, and it's happened like in three places in the New Testament. This is one of them. And you can kind of see why somebody might want to add something on there. It's not like he added a bunch of new stuff. Like it's consistent with Matthew and Luke. It ends in a way that like punches you in the gut. Like you're like, everybody's terrified. Nobody listened to Jesus, but trust us, he did show up later on. And it just leaves you like this. And you're like, is this a happy ending? I'm not sure that this is a happy ending, right? This is everybody sucks but Jesus. And you know what? That's the purpose of the Gospel of Mark. Everybody is terrible except for Jesus. It leaves absolutely no question that Jesus is the hero of the story. Jesus is the only person who moves the story forward. The book of Revelation says, only the Lamb who is slain is capable of opening the seal that opens the scroll. Only Jesus. And Mark just punches you in the gut with it. You know, and I talk about how internalizing the scriptures really helps you make more biblically informed decisions. And when I talk about Jesus being the hero, I don't want to take away from like 2,000 years of ancestors who have taken the teachings that Jesus handed down through the apostles and preserved it through all kinds of rigorous challenges. Like we look at the world today and we're like, it's so dark. It's been dark for 2,000 years. It's just been dark in different ways. You think the bubonic plague, people were like, man, I am really, really worried about 9/11. It's not, I mean, it's the darkness has been going on for a long time. This is not new. And our ancestors moved the faith forward. We are here today because of 2,000 plus years of church history. People like our grandparents, their grandparents, handing the faith down to their descendants. And it's our responsibility to hand it down to our kids and make sure that this overcomes current challenges so that it will go on into future generations. The church does this. You are a part of that story that continues from Scripture. You are essential. You are the person who directs your life because you make the decisions. And you are the protagonist of your story. But Jesus is the hero of your story. All that stuff deserves our reverence, but only Jesus deserves our worship. Jesus is the one who opens the scroll. Jesus is who we worship because only he is worthy of our worship. And the Gospel of Mark just hits you with it over and over again. And if you pay attention to that, it almost looks like that's the only thing that's there. But there's more stuff there. Almost everything in Matthew and Luke is in Mark, but you have to look at it. You have to look at it and you have to meditate on it because it hits you with some strange stuff. And you're like, what in the world does this mean? Like 3 weeks ago when I was preaching, Matt did great for 2 weeks, gave me a break, and I'm so grateful for it. But we were talking about Jesus healing a blind man by spitting in his eyes and putting his hands over them. And then the guy's like, oh, I can see, it's great. But the people look like trees. Everybody looks like trees walking around. And then the remarkable thing is that Jesus is like, okay, let's do round 2. And he does it again. He doesn't spit in his eyes again because we were saying, I think he got enough in there the first time. And then he does it a second time. And then the guy can see clearly, which is like, why did Jesus need 2 rounds to heal this guy? I mean, the guy can rebuke a storm. The guy can turn a kid's lunch into feed 5,000 people and have 35 baskets left over. I don't remember the number, but Jesus can do remarkable things. Why does he need to do 2 rounds on this guy? What is happening with this? But then you read in the next section that Peter and the apostles recognize that Jesus is the Messiah. But then when Jesus says he's got to die, they start to rebuke him. And Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. Now, if you read the Gospel of Matthew, he says, Peter, I call you rock. You are a rock. And based on your confession, that is a rock upon which I will build my church. I'm not interpreting that passage right now. But he says it's because of the Holy Spirit that you're able to see it. But Mark doesn't have that line. Mark doesn't have that line at all. If you want to interpret that passage, you got to look at the blind man right before it. Peter can see that Jesus is the Messiah, but he's looking at the Messiah like that guy looking at people looking like trees running around. He's only had part of his vision restored at this point, and God is the muscle behind it. You have to look at Mark. You have to really think about it. And I think it's cool. I think it's poetic. But you know why I think it's poetic? You know why I think it's worthwhile? Because Jesus is worthwhile. Right? Like if you were reading the New York Times, reading about the writer's strike, and every single article you read, you had to be like, what in the world does this mean? You have to step back and you drink a cup of coffee and you come back and read the article again, and then you think about it. You're like, I'm not sure. And next thing you know, you're showering. You're like, oh, I get it. The writer's strike is going to affect the TV shows that I want to watch because Hollywood's exploiting them. That would be horrible. It would take you years to read one magazine, one newspaper, and it would be stupid, right? It's not worth it. Jesus is worth it. And it's neat because you get that insight that hits you on a level that's deeper than your logic. And you're like, oh, I see it and I relate to it with parts of myself that go beyond just my reading comprehension. I get it. And the Gospel of Mark does that. The Gospel of Mark forces you to really think it through so that it can hit you on a gut level. It's cool. I didn't have this appreciation before we started preaching on it. I just thought it was cool, but I mean, obviously I liked it, but I like it a lot better now. So today we are going to read another obscure passage where Jesus says something incredibly insulting to a woman. Like if he had said that today, oh my gosh, I would. Man, I wish we could see a TikTok video of somebody saying this to women and seeing how they respond. But that would be awesome. I would watch that for sure. That would go viral. But okay, so let's go ahead and read Mark 7:24 through 30. Jesus left that place and went to the vicinity of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know it, yet he could not keep his presence secret. In fact, as soon as she heard about him, a woman whose daughter was possessed by an impure spirit came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek, born in Syrian Phoenicia. She begged Jesus to drive the demon out of her daughter. First, let the children eat all they want, he told her, for it's not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. That was the TikTok one. Lord, she replied, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. Then he told her, for such a reply you may go. The demon has left your daughter. She went home and found her child lying on the bed and the demon gone. Leave that. We'll come back to that. There should be a blank slide there. So when you read this passage, this is another one of those ones where you go, what? What in the world is happening here? Like, when you think of Jesus and the way he acted, when you think of his character, that thing he says to that woman, is that one of those things that you imagine coming out of someone with the character of Jesus? Not me. I guarantee you I'll read this again 3 years from now and be like, what? And I'll have to think it through again because it just catches me off guard. And so when I read this passage, I'm just gonna read it in layers to you, like a little bit of almost inductive Bible study, but it's a controlled inductive Bible study because I know where it's going. This is more like a deductive version of inductive Bible study. So so when you're reading this passage, the first thing that sticks out to me is that Jesus has just left arguing with Pharisees and he's left the region of Judea. So he's no longer in Israel and he is in the region of Tyre. And this woman who Jesus didn't apparently want her to know that he was there finds out that he's there and goes to him and throws herself prostrate at his feet and tells him about her daughter who has an impure spirit, asking her to cast that spirit out. And Jesus doesn't just say no. He could have been like, look, I'm busy. I'm not going to do it though. Instead he goes, I'm here to feed my children, and I'm not going to give my children's bread to the dogs. You're not a Jew. And the Jewish people apparently call people from this region dogs. Man, if you said that to a woman today, oh my gosh, that would not go well. But the woman responds, and she says, even the dogs get to eat the crumbs under the children's table. And Jesus responds, I think in other versions of the book, he's astonished, but Mark would never let Jesus be astonished with somebody. He responds by telling her, okay, your daughter is healed. And then the woman goes home and finds her daughter with no impure spirit inside of her. And so when I first am looking at it, I'm like, bread. Jesus is the bread of life. The bread of life is meant for the Jews. And maybe non-Jews are eating the crumbs of the bread of life under the table. Like, even the crumbs of life are better than nothing, right? That'll preach, but I don't think that's not the right interpretation of the passage, right? There's more going on there. And I don't think Jesus just wants to give us the crumbs either. I don't think there's second-class citizens in the kingdom where some people eat like a full course meal and some people are lucky to get the scraps. That is very not Jesus-like. I think, so you have to look at it, and if you were somebody from the Old Testament, you would be picking up on extra cues here. This is where you need somebody who is more well-read to point you in a direction. Because there's 4 things in this passage that are pointing back to the Old Testament. The first is that this is taking place in Tyre. Tyre has a whole lot of relevance in ancient Israel because these people all were fighting each other and killing each other. 2, it's talking about bread. 3, it's talking about dogs. And 4, Jesus is performing a miracle that has been performed before in the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, the prophet Elijah does this exact same miracle. The prophet Elijah in the northern kingdom, in the region of Tyre, and Sidon is also part of it, but they're both part of this. He goes up to a woman because it hasn't rained. I don't know how long into this famine it is, but there's a 3-year famine where it never rains in the northern kingdom because they started to worship Baal. Baal is a fertility god, and fertility god does more than get wives pregnant, right? It also causes the crops to be fertile and to grow seeds. Right, so they are looking to Baal to make sure that they're fed, and because God is mad about it, He doesn't let it rain there for 3 years, and so this famine is causing people to starve. And Elijah is hungry and goes to this woman and asks her to cook him some bread, and she says, "This is the last grain I have before my kid and I starve." And Elijah says it's going to work out in her favor. So this woman takes the last of her grain and she makes bread for Elijah. And then, miraculously, her grain jar fills up and never runs out for the rest of the famine. So God rewards her faithfulness through that bread. But soon after, that woman comes up to Elijah and she says, "So you gave us some bread, but now there's an evil spirit in my daughter. I thought you were a man of God. What in the world is this?" And Elijah says, "Well, you can go home, and I've cast it out of her." And so she walks home, and the daughter is no longer having an impure spirit inside of her. That's a lot of commonality with this passage. We've talked about Tyre, we've talked about bread, we've talked about healing, but we haven't talked about dogs. And dogs really applies to this passage because Elijah really only interacts in the scriptures with 2 women from Tyre. The first is that woman with the bread, and the other one is the girl. We talked about her a couple months ago, I think. I don't remember how long ago it's been. The evil villain that everybody knows is bad, but nobody knows anything about her, Jezebel, right? Jezebel is the person who is from Phoenicia. She marries the king of the northern kingdom, and she introduces Baal worship into the kingdom. So Elijah hates that. Elijah has this big epic encounter with the priests of Baal, like where they set up all this wood on pyres, and all the prophets of Baal are calling down fire, and fire doesn't come, and Elijah shows off, and he covers it with water, his pyre, and it just burns to the ground. Even the stone burns up, and then they murder all the rest of the priests of Baal, and he runs. So Jezebel doesn't like Elijah, right? Like they are in a blood feud, not like a Taylor Swift blood feud. It's like a Harry Potter and Voldemort kind of blood feud where only one can live or the other, and neither one of them is guaranteed to survive while the other one lives, right? So Elijah doesn't do anything. He just speaks what God tells him. He says that Jezebel is going to die and be pushed out of a tower where she gets eaten by dogs. And that's what happens. Jezebel gets pushed out of a tower and eaten by dogs, which is a disgraceful way for a ruler to go out, right? So all 4 of these things really are being brought up on purpose in Mark. Jesus is all throughout Judea, nobody recognizing him for who he is. His very apostles are only half seeing him for who he is. Only the demons and the forces of nature respect Jesus for who he is, except for this woman from Tyre, members of ancient enemies of Israel. Jesus brings up bread and he brings up dogs. It's almost as if it's letting you know that Jesus is redeeming Tyre. He's redeeming the enemies of Israel, and that the Israelites might be the children of God. But it's going to expand. This is going to be a blessing to everybody. Mark is letting you know that without taking the emphasis off of Jesus being the hero. It's beautiful. This may be historically unprecedented, but it isn't prophetically unprecedented because it's in the prophets. It's just not something that they were thinking about. When your family members are being killed for hundreds of years by members who are occupying you, and you're being humiliated, sometimes the only thing you can think about is the part of you that's hurting. And when you're in pain, you don't always have the greatest perspective. I know I don't. I have terrible perspective when I am not in a good mood, or I'm grouchy, or I have man flu, or whatever it is, right? Like women just march through it. I just have a bad, bitter perspective, right? I just need a double dose of Lexapro that day. Let's go to Zechariah. Zechariah 9, 3 through 8. Tyre has built herself a stronghold. She has heaped up silver like dust and gold like the dirt of the streets. But the Lord will take away her possessions and destroy power on the sea, and she will be consumed by fire. Ashokan will see it and fear. Gaza will writhe in agony, and Ekron too, for her hope will wither. Gaza will lose her king, and Ashkelon will be deserted. A mongrel people will occupy Ashdod, and I will put an end to the pride of the Philistines. I will take the blood from their mouths, the forbidden food from between their teeth. Those who are left will belong to our God and become a clan in Judah, and Ekron will be like the Jebusites. But I will encamp at my temple to guard it against marauding forces. Never again will an oppressor overrun my people, for now I am keeping watch. Which is a crazy thing to say before Rome occupies his people, but that's about to happen. But what's cool about this passage is God is talking about all these ancient enemies that you read about in the Old Testament. All those peoples show up, and they all are fighting with Israel. But God is getting ready to wreck them. And he's going to wreck them hard. Because Alexander the Great from Macedonia is getting ready to assemble all the Greek army and head all the way to India. And he is going to destroy pretty much all these cultures, but leave Israel intact, right? The old story is that he actually went to the Israel temple and made a sacrifice to their God, which is remarkable. Even though he's not like, he doesn't like convert or anything. He just shows respect, shows deference, and moves on to India, right? All those people get wrecked. But God says there's going to be a remnant of them. They're not all going to die. Their culture is going to die. But they are going to be like a tribe of Canaan, like the Jebusites. And I didn't even know what the Jebusites were, so I looked it up. Turns out the Jebusites, the land of Canaan at one point was called Jebus. There's no record of this outside of the Bible, so some scholars don't think it's real. There's a lot of stuff in the Bible that people disagree with because it's only in the Bible until the archaeologists find it, like the Hittites. Like, no, the Hittites didn't exist until they found the Hittites, right? But the Jebusites lived in that town. They called that land Jebus, apparently. And when they conquered Canaan, these are people who stayed and just joined the Israelite people. So all these enemies are going to become grafted in to the story. And I was thinking about putting the NLT thing up here too. Would you bring up verse 7 again, David? I'm just going to tell you what the NLT says. The cool thing about the NLT is that when you think about translations, right? When you are translating from one language to another one, frequently the wording is a little bit off, right? Because I think a third of the Greek language, I think it's a third of the Greek language, doesn't have an equivalent in English. So when you're trying to translate it, you have the ability to translate it like almost word for word, but in going word for word, you actually will miscommunicate the idea. But then if you want to translate it to get the ideas right, you're going to get the wording wrong. And there's a danger when you avoid the wording, because all translations are a little bit subjective. When you disregard the words, oh my gosh, you are really in danger of that. And so you have translations like the NIV, which try to balance it out. Keep the words right, keep the ideas right. And the NLT goes a little bit further over into the ideal realm. It's not quite like Eugene Peterson, like over here in the Message realm, where like Jesus moves into the neighborhood, right? That's like a total, like, who cares about the original wording? Just get the ideas, right? The NLT goes a little bit over. And the NLT says, I will take the bloody meat from their mouths and the forbidden and their forbidden sacrifices, the forbidden food between their teeth. What's the next line, David? Okay, so the NLT really hammers it out and makes it a lot clearer. They don't want people to be eating like strangled animals. And you know why they don't want you to eat strangled animals? Because it's got blood in them. God really, really cares about whether these people are eating animals with blood in them. He really cares about them engaging in ritual sacrifices to other gods. He's going to take that away. It's so much clearer in the NLT. This idea of no blood in the animals goes back to Noah, because before Noah, no one could eat animals. It was strictly forbidden. And God tells Noah, you can eat animals, but you gotta drain them of their blood, because their blood is their life. You're not eating their life. Their life belongs to me. A lot of sacrifices is literally pouring the life on the altar, pouring the blood on the altar, and they eat the meat because that's not the life. They take it so seriously that it gets encoded in Leviticus, and then after the Acts Council, where they start bringing in the Gentiles, and they're like, okay, yeah, of course, you don't have to wear just one kind of linen. Like, you don't have to get circumcised, but you better not eat meat with blood in it, right? Don't eat strangled animals, because you still have to give that reverence to God. So God is going to graft people in and bring them into his story. And he wants them to be restored to a place of legitimate worship. What does it mean to you that so many people who are not Jewish have been grafted into Israel's story? Do you think of yourself as grafted into Israel's story? Because if you're not born a Jew, then you're not born into the story of God, the tribe of God. And God has opened the way for you. What does it mean to be grafted into the story to you? Do you see your story aligning with the Old Testament at all? Like, how many times have you read the Old Testament? Have you read it like once or two or three times? I mean, it's sometimes burdensome in some places. I get it. But if you internalize it, it becomes part of your story and you become part of its story. What would be different about your life if you were internalizing that story? Can you see your life looking different if you were to internalize that story more? Because it's literally the way of you, it literally is bringing you into bigger and deeper union with your Creator. What do you think about the Syrophoenician woman, which is just Syrian-controlled Phoenicia, the Syrophoenician woman? What do you think about her posture towards Jesus? Prostrate before him, not even wincing when he lobs a huge insult at her, recognizing him for who he is and who she is before him, knowing that he is capable of fulfilling the parts of her that are the most desperate. And knowing that Jesus was there for her to do it. What do you think about Jesus testing her? Do you feel like God is testing you in certain areas? How is God testing you? Now, when I think when Jesus tested this woman, I don't think he was trying to figure something out. I don't think when you find yourself being tested that God is like being the CIA under your deepest, darkest desires and the deepest recesses of your mind. God knows more about you than you do. God knows everything about you. And he loves you. If God is testing you, it's not because he needs to figure something out about you. It's because he's trying to reveal something about you to you. How are you being tested? And what is God revealing to you about yourself? Happens to me all the time. I'm on a stage, but believe me. Also believe this. God may show you things about yourself or expose you to parts of yourself that you don't want to go near. The parts of you that you don't want people to see, the parts of you that make you flare up and rage if anybody gets near it, or make you want to retreat, use sarcasm, use a sense of humor to keep people away. Jesus wants to enter into that. He wants you to invite him into that. To invite the Holy Spirit into that part of your life. To enter into your ability to process emotions, to process feelings. Talk to younger parts of yourself that had to deal with things that you weren't emotionally prepared to handle. Jesus wants to walk you through that, and he wants to speak to those parts of you. He wants to be the hero of your story. Jesus wants to be the author of your redemption story. There is not anything inside of you that is outside the grasp of the redemption that Jesus is offering you. All he wants you to do is let him in. Now that was a whole lot of questions, and I probably couldn't repeat all of them. But I can repeat more later on. We can talk more about it. If this is revealing stuff inside of you, the one thing, I'm not telling you what to do. This is between you and God to work it out. The one thing I suggest is that you don't keep it to yourself. You gotta now. Don't broadcast it. Don't be like, don't incriminate yourself up here. Like, be like, last week I punched a police officer and ran away, right? Like, don't, like that's gonna get you put in jail, right? Like that's bad. That was the first crime I came up with. I don't know, it was a terrible crime, but like, yeah, don't incriminate yourself. Don't put yourself in unnecessary danger. When it comes to authenticity, there are boundaries that are in place to protect you. Be intelligent about it. Be wise about it. But find somebody who has earned your trust. Somebody, and talk to them about it. Don't be by yourself in this. We want to be with you. As a community, we want to be with you. That doesn't mean the whole community needs to know everything about you. But as a community, we need to support one another because everybody here has things that Jesus is trying to dislodge. Every single one of us has darkness in the recesses of our being. And who knows, yours might feel terrible, but the person next to you might be worse. Maybe not. You could be the worst one here, and it doesn't matter. This church exists because we want to be a part of your redemption story. We want your redemption story to showcase the glory of Jesus all throughout this community. We want this community to know that this church is something special because of a God who's working in our hearts and transforming our being. This is all God because I didn't have this planned. This is crazy. So let's do communion and let's pray for one another.